Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for making it out here on an early Friday morning for the talk. Thank you. We just wanted to say a quick thank you to the Art Basel team for having us, and especially to the panelists who are participating today. The aim of today's discussion is to look at the accelerated and expanded role the private sector the private sector plays in leveraging art as cultural diplomacy in the Middle East, and to a certain extent the greater region. While art occupies a kind of an increasingly strategic role in local or national branding strategies or cultural tourism, collectors in these emerging markets are faced with kind of opportunities and also challenges navigating an evolution towards patronage. I wanted to just quickly give you a quick slideshow or presentation of personal experiences of cultural patronage. My name is Payam Sharifi. I'm the co-founder of Slavs and Tatars, and I'm moderating this panel. I should probably start off by saying. I grew up in Houston, Texas, which is, despite having a kind of self-aggrandized sense of itself, used to be a desert, a cultural desert. And when John de Menil arrived in Houston, when Dominique de Menil in the 50s, and after the Vichy government, they set up the Menil Foundation, and the Menil Foundation basically put Houston on the cultural map, both in the United States and an international global level. The idea of patronage and arts patronage in Houston was always linked to a sense of civic responsibility, and the role of the collector, as the collector evolves into a patron, is essentially one of taking on those civic duties to a certain extent. Most of you are familiar with the Menil, probably either you've been there or you've heard of it, the Rothko Chapel and the sorts. And what was interesting about the Menil, of course, was that the story continues to a certain level of also the limits of cultural patronage, or at least the sort of running out against the public sector. A very unknown story about the Menil and the Dia Art Foundation. I had the pleasure of listening to Philippe Verne recently in Moscow give a talk about the Dia. The Dia was started by the Menils, the Menil family, Philippe de Menil and Heiner Friedrich, and a quite interesting story is that towards the end of their reign, they converted to Sufism and actually commissioned Dan Flavin to do a mosque in Soho on Mercer Street, and that was when both the oil crisis had happened in the early '80s, and that was when I think Dominique de Menil kind of had enough of let's say the quite progressive agenda of her family's cultural patronage, and they stepped in and removed Heiner Friedrich from the board and essentially closed down the mosque. And these are some images that I received from the Dia Foundation, which have been very rarely seen actually of the Dan Flavin installation. It's safe to say that we're living in a kind of period of heightened history at the moment. 2011 has been a year of riveting changes, and we're barely halfway through the year so far. Against this backdrop of sort of tumult and hope, art has sort of woken up from its hangover, to paraphrase Okwi Enwezor's recent article in Art Forum. There's definitely been a kind of a bruising and sensitive period in the past 6 months where at least every month some kind of controversy or event has surrounded art's sort of limit to running up against public sector interests or cultural sensitivities. In the past year, just to give a quick review, we've had David Voinovich's video removed from the Smithsonian. We've had Vaina, the art group in Russia, who's in jail at the moment, who won the Innovation Prize. This is a still from Voinovich's Fire in My Belly. The Sharjah Art Biennial's dismissal of Jack Persekian, and of course the arrest of Ai Weiwei. I wanted to start out by introducing the first panelist to my right, Abdullah al-Turki. He sits on the Middle East Committee of the Tate, and also is the creative director of Edge of Arabia, which has been a quite important platform in bringing together contemporary artists from Saudi Arabia and the region, but also quite an incredible organic growth into creating a kind of a platform for both curators, art enthusiasts, and artists from the region. Abdullah, I wanted to begin by asking you about this decision to kind of expand Edge of Arabia's remit at this moment from let's say, a more Saudi one to a larger region, to the greater region. with the Future of Promise that you recently showed to much success in Venice?
Well, the Edgebury has been promoting Saudi contemporary artists for the past 4 years, and we initially planned the exhibition in Venice back in 2010. But after the government of Saudi Arabia announced their initiative of participating in the 54th Venice Biennial this year, we thought of if we had another exhibition to promote Saudi contemporary artists and to show Saudi artists, it might mislead the audience and might cause some kind of confusion to the audience. At the same time, Abraj Capital, who owns the Abraj Prize, which is the world's largest art prize for the artists from the Manasa region, decided to increase the level of patronage, and they wanted to showcase their winning artist in a platform other than Art Dubai, where they usually show their winning artists. So we thought that both by doing an exhibition in Venice of Pan-Arab artists, we'll be ticking all the boxes, where we'll be showing Saudi artists, and we'll continue supporting the Saudi artists that we've been promoting for the past few years. And at the same time, Abraj will be able to promote their prize and their winning artist in the same venue. And this was the reason why we went into that direction, and I think it was a very successful model. And we look forward to doing more of this Middle Eastern exhibitions in the future. But for the time being, we'll be mainly focusing on Saudi artists.
Okay. Dana, Farouki, to the right of Abdullah, is a collector and patron based between Dubai and New York, and also sits on the board of the PS1 MoMA. Dana, yesterday we briefly discussed this idea of a sense of pan-Arabism, and too often we see a kind of this sort of segmentation of either a Doha model or a Abu Dhabi model, or even sort of certain kinds of competition within countries like the Emirates. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience as an insider-outsider in this as a patron?
Sure. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. to Palestinian parents. So I always I had a different idea when it came to my own identity. I didn't necessarily, kind of have an affinity only to other Palestinians, because there weren't so many around in Washington. I rather had this affinity to kind of Arabs in general. So whenever I met one, I felt like, there was kind of this relationship that existed between us. And that, I was kind of commentating. I'd never lived in the Middle East until just 6 months ago, when my husband and I relocated to Dubai. And he is Lebanese and kind of feels very much Lebanese, and kind of, associates really only with Lebanon in the region. I mean, rather than kind of anywhere else. I mean, he feels very much like an outsider in Dubai, where, kind of people from all places live. But I kind of had this different mentality where I feel really not even Palestinian American, I feel Arab American more than anything else. And that's kind of the way I was raised, and my parents were very engaged in Washington, in the government. They're very kind of politically engaged and politically active, but they were also kind of affiliated with all sorts of different causes, really to promote the Arab American cause. I mean, an example, for instance, is they're the co-chairs of the International Committee at the Kennedy Center, the national platform for performing arts. And recently, this was kind of the product of many years of being patrons of that institution. They co-hosted the Arab Arts Festival at the Kennedy Center, where they brought performing arts groups and also actually visual artists from all 22 nations of the Arab League to present kind of a 3-week-long festival on the national stage in Washington, D.C. And that resulted in things like 200 Syrian children opening up from, I think, a Christian choir, opening up the festival, and bringing these kids who had never had any relationship with America in and performing on the national stage, which is a very significant thing. I mean, people sometimes underestimate, I think, the museums, the national museums in Washington, because they're maybe not as kind of, glamorous, or they don't kind of produce as provocative shows as, let's say, the shows as the museums in New York. But we must kind of recognize, and I think this is true of also probably the national projects that are opening in Doha or Abu Dhabi, for instance, the importance of kind of a national program, and how that is very much linked to cultural diplomacy and kind of a strategy of sorts that's really veritable. So I then became, very involved with a number of organizations in New York, and always, I was not only involved as kind of, maybe some of the other board members at MoMA PS1 or Creative Time, but I have kind of my own hidden agenda, and that is also related to kind of this Arab American identity. So, in conversations I had with, for instance, Creative Time, which is another organization that I sit on the board of. It's a public arts program organization in New York. They were initially, when I joined the board, a national organization, and I've had many conversations with the director to kind of, widen that scope of the scope that they. So recently, we've become an international organization. I'd like to think that I played some role in that. I'm not sure, but they've also become very engaged with artists that I'm particularly supportive of. For example, Willie Jaidah and Emily Jasser have been kind of the recipients of their international residency prize, and that also resulted from a number of conversations that I've had with the curator, Nato Thompson, and also the director, Anne Pasternak, with respect to MoMA PS1. This year, MoMA PS1, I helped organize a trip for them to come visit the region, a board members trip, and it included actually, as many senior staff members as well as board members. So people like Kathy Halbrecht, the associate director of MoMA, Peter Ely, chief curator at PS1, Klaus Biesenbach, the director of PS1, Glenn Lowry, who's had historical interest in the region, came and we visited Qatar. We visited Doha and Mataf and the museums there, and then we came to Dubai. We visited Art Dubai, and then we also were there for the Sharjah Biennial. So I'm hopeful that will also kind of continue the engagement and interest and produce some sort of kind of fruitful programming in the future. I mean, PS1 also is very much committed to kind of widening their international scope, and as a board member there, that's kind of one of my, I would say, kind of hidden agendas of sorts in playing a role in those institutions. So the other thing that I just wanted to mention is Abdullah has this kind of public platform that I don't have, but one thing that I'm trying to formalize at the moment is actually, it must be just across the street from the mosque that the photos that you saw, because I saw it was 155 Mercer, at 158 Mercer. My parents recently, several years ago, when they decided to buy an apartment in New York, when all their children had kind of moved there and they wanted to establish a residence there, were kind of wondering, it happened at the exact same time where I was becoming kind of more committed as a collector and as a patron, decided that they wanted to kind of have this residence not only be kind of a home for them, but also be kind of a public space of sorts that was really dedicated specifically to the promotion of art from the Middle East. So we have this apartment that isn't kind of a formal entity of sorts, but acts as kind of this, venue of sorts to organizations that are interested in promoting, and also in promoting kind of arts from the Middle East. So we've had kind of a number of openings there, and we have kind of a permanent collection basically on view that is made up of art from the Middle East. And we've lent out the space to kind of different organizations such as like Ashkal Alwan, a Lebanese-based nonprofit that also seeks to kind of promote and educate in Lebanon. And Badoon Magazine, for instance, also recently became a nonprofit organization that seeks to kind of be a critical platform for art of the region and art and culture. So I'm trying at this point to kind of think of a kind of a more maybe systematic program of sorts for this space, but at the moment, in some ways, I just wanted to kind of present this in this kind of platform as almost an invitation for people to kind of, know that they have access to kind of this kind of space in New York if they have a need for it in any way. So.
Okay. And our next panelist, Tariq Al-Jaidah, is based in Doha, Qatar. Actually, now that we're moving to that a nice segue to that country. And Tariq is the founder of Jaidah Brothers, a media and advertising with successful business in media and advertising, and also has been instrumental in several arts initiatives, such as the Qatar art projects and Souk Waqif, and as well as the recent Qatar Art Center that maybe you can tell us a little bit about, Tariq.
Well, you know, we live in a different environment, and in our part of the world, most initiatives come from the government because you don't have major corporations. So the source of income or sponsorship will mainly depend on the government. So what I was trying to do is to stimulate the art scene by creating a trading platform for arts. Because at the end of the day, many emerging artists from our part of the world didn't have that platform where to showcase and you know, come out. And like what Abdullah did, for instance, he promoted the Saudi artists abroad, where they brought their fame back home from abroad. So what I was trying to do in Doha is to try and catch up with what our superiors or what the government is doing. As many of you know that in Qatar, there's at least 5 new museums being planned as we speak. So by creating that Waqif Art Center, which was in the heart of the old town, we put together a few platforms in promoting different aspects of art, and then did some joint ventures and partnerships with institutions from the region and from abroad, where we were able to create and stimulate the art scene in Qatar. From there on, after that success, the Qatar, which is a cultural village established by the government, they approached me to create a partnership to create the same model, but on a bigger scale. So the good part is with the governmental support, you will have a lot of funding, and partly you will have a lot of assistance where you can bypass a lot of bureaucracy which may happen. But all in all, I believe people are looking at the region as the last frontier for the arts in the world, because you know, there was a boom in Chinese art. So the Middle Eastern art is becoming a little bit under the limelight. And with the creation of all these new museums, because they have to fill up the walls, and they just can't buy everything from abroad, so things has to be created locally. Therefore, I believe with the different components, like private initiatives and the governmental initiatives, we will be able to catch up with the rest of the world, sort of say.
Tariq, tell me a little bit about this, your understanding of this kind of traditional firewall that exists in the Western understanding of patronage between sort of non-profit and for-profit. And of course, that's a bit more complicated scenario in the Middle East and in Qatar, right? You've got, like you said, you have the top-down initiatives, which are these museums, but there needs to be a vibrant commercial sector. Is that a key to your initiatives as well?
I think we are still in the evolution stage. For us to reach the non-profit stage, I believe we need another cycle, another maybe 15, 20 years, because everything happened in the last 15 years. The whole art scene boom which took place in the region. I mean, okay, now there's been an art scene from the beginning of the century, and you know, in the Levant, where they were exposed, in areas like Morocco, they were, you know, exposed from the Orientalist time. But our part of the world, as many of you know, we're quite young. So I believe there will come a time for a non-profit organization, but I think there is many other gaps to be filled by the time we reach to that stage.
And this is a question to any of you, is who would you see as your audiences in terms of, or do you see any kind of divergence in audiences from yourself and from the public sector, let's say from the government? Is there any kind of instances where you felt that the audiences are actually diverging from who you imagine them to be and who maybe the government imagines? Abdullah?
Well, mainly our audience are international audience, because all of the exhibitions that we've done in the past were abroad. We haven't done any exhibitions in Saudi Arabia. But the scope of our Saudi audience is increasing, and there is more interest in the art that we're presenting from the local citizenship. But our main audience till date is actually the international audience and international press, because in a recent exhibition that we've done in Berlin last year, we presented Saudi contemporary art for the first time in Germany, and the German audience were exposed to something that they were not familiar with, and they didn't expect to be seeing such quality and such type of artworks that are coming from our region, or coming especially from Saudi, because there's this idea about Saudi that is all uncreative, and it's all behind the veil, and all of this unnecessarily correct ideas. So we had a very good feedback when we were in Berlin, and we had a lot of traffic from the German audience, and so this is basically our main audience. But recently we've been seeing an increased interest in art in general, and especially in our part of the world. And especially in the fair, we see more Saudi collectors coming in, and we see more of the Saudi people are involved in different art initiatives. But for a country that doesn't have any public institutions or many commercial galleries, I think art is something very new for them, and they will have to develop in the coming few years.
And Donna, back to your discussion of this kind of a pan-regional approach. Do you feel that that's something that can only happen from the private sector? I mean, do you feel that you have to sometimes at least sell or present it differently if you're doing artists from Levant or artists from the Gulf, or do you,
Well, I think, I mean, I was speaking about it in respect to the kind of the fact that I'm Palestinian, and Palestinians have this kind of plight when it comes to identity, because, for instance, I've never been to Palestine before. I've been almost everywhere else in the Middle East, but not there, which is quite kind of, I think, problematic in a sense. So, but what I've noticed is that, people don't really have the same kind of vision of this kind of connected pan-Arab world as I do. So I feel like, Emiratis feel very much Emirati. They don't really feel, much affinity at all to someone from Lebanon.
even in the arts, even as an audience vis-a-vis the arts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's also kind of this, a very, like artists, for instance, are not necessarily very interested in a pan-Arab identity. They don't like to be in pan-Arab shows. They don't like to be affiliated with another artist just because of kind of, where they're from. So, I think, in some ways it's kind of necessary, and there's an advantage to associating, these artists together, and certainly in the case of kind of introducing them to kind of an international audience, because, it's an easy introduction. And I think there are relationships and kind of things that connect the two, but I also think that there are great rifts between the different countries, and people aren't probably, aware of those. I mean, at least other people, people looking in from the outside.
Even within the same country as well.
Even within the same country, yeah. I mean, there's kind of competition between, for instance, Sharjah, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai, and they're they're kind of 20, 30 minutes, 45 minutes away from one another.
Yes, recently somebody told me that the joke in the Emirates was that Dubai had become the Sharjah of Abu Dhabi, in the sense that Sharjah was to Dubai before. Tariq, can you tell me a little bit about how you see this, the different models, let's say the Abu Dhabi model versus the Qatar model of importing, let's say, the knowledge base, and as opposed to sort of starting from scratch on your own?
Well, I believe both models are healthy, because at the end of the day, they all have positive objectives. I mean, in Abu Dhabi, what they're doing is instead of starting where others started, they started where others ended. So rather than creating something from scratch, you already get to the Guggenheim, and there's already a track record, history. So people will definitely be more encouraged to see a Guggenheim or a Louvre museum rather than Mathaf, maybe. I mean, that maybe on a strategical or branding perspective. But what our people are feeling in Qatar is trying to create something from scratch. I believe is also a good platform because definitely you're going to end up getting a lot of assistance and know-how from abroad. So eventually you will end up with a similar product. But at the end of the day, you will create your own brand rather than going with another brand. And we can use Al Jazeera as a case study where it became one of the largest news networks in such a short time.
And in a way has a better brand than CNN today, maybe.
Exactly. So I believe then if we made a success story in one platform, that gives us a chance to self-challenge ourselves to try and create other challenges. And this is why we're so ambitious. And there's already 5 museums underway, so you can imagine how much work and how many people has to be involved in that.
I noticed that some of the panelists sit on boards on Western institutions, and I wanted to address this, the idea of maybe the possibility or not to sit on boards in your own countries or adopted countries. Can you tell me a little bit about that, Abdullah or Dana, maybe? Your choice to maybe sit on the board of the Tate. Is there similar interests or possibilities to do so in your own country?
Well, as I said before, there are no enough institutions in my country yet, but there have been few royal decrees to focus on culture and promote the culture from Saudi Arabia and to build new museums, which will be coming in the coming few years. But this year there was the inaugural show at the Venice Biennale for Saudi Arabia, where 2 female artists were representing the Saudi and they were the cultural ambassadors of Saudi Arabia. The reason I sit on the Tate acquisition committee is it's more about patronage. So it's about supporting and patronizing the art from our region. And there's obviously a difference between collecting and being a patron and helping, promoting the artists from the region, as Dana said, is the main initiative and the main motive for being on the board.
Is there an educational role in Edge of Arabia's remit, or even as your own sort of private role as a patron, for example, on the committee of the Tate?
We always try to conduct different workshops during the exhibitions that we make. And recently we have fundraised for a project, which is the educational program that we will be launching later this year, which is a nationwide competition for students between the age of 16 and 24 who lives in Saudi, who are either filmmakers, photographers, or artists, to submit their works and to win an award and to get some kind of an educational program abroad and to develop their careers.
Dana, yesterday you mentioned this, we talked about this briefly, this gold, the fact that in the absence of these institutions in the region, the arrival of auction houses has kind of created a kind of a gold standard, with Sotheby's and Christie's arriving in the absence of any kind of larger institutions. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, what we kind of were discussing was, and I think it's really interesting. The model has kind of not been the same as it has been in the West, where kind of educational institutions or cultural institutions like museums existed before an auction house or a gallery. In the UAE in particular, it happened exactly the other way around. I mean, I would say I think probably auction houses and galleries opened at the exact same time. And with this growing audience of interest, this is, I get maybe fortunate and unfortunate. What happened is that people are seeking the education and are eager to learn more about it. And so the only kind of resource that they have are these commercial entities. So oddly, they have gotten their arts education from the 2 auctions a year that Christie's has had over the last kind of, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. Or Or, you know, in another case, like a gallery like the Third Line Gallery, one of the kind of first galleries that opened in Dubai, has also been this kind of source of information and resources. And they've played this kind of quasi, I would say, almost nonprofit role of sorts. I mean, their program is, I think, you know, significantly, the scope is significantly wider than many galleries that exist abroad in New York or London, because they have also this need to kind of educate the population, you know, in addition to just kind of being a commercial enterprise. So, you know, in some ways, I think it is problematic that, for instance, Sotheby's is really recognized as kind of the ultimate authority, or Christie's the ultimate authority of art in the UAE, for instance, rather than a not-for-profit institution. So, I mean, you know, they clearly have specific missions, and that is to sell the art which they present at auction. I mean, that's their mission. So it's in their benefit to kind of, you know, promote only the artists that they're showing at auction, and kind of create this kind of, you know, different model of sorts. You know, but I was saying also that they've also, you know, in some ways played kind of a more positive role in the region, because they're really kind of, you know, actively trying to engage an audience and build an audience. So it's, you know, it's kind of a double-edged sword of sorts in a way.
Tariq, what have been some of the limits of the private sector, do you feel? I mean, we understand the opportunities for the private sector, but how do you sort of, how would you describe some of the kind of the obstacles or the limits to the private sector, sort of, as opposed to dynamism and the kind of the resourcefulness? Is it a logistic question? Is it a financial question that vis-a-vis, let's say, the government support of the arts?
I don't think it is an issue of finance. I mean, if we look at the case of Edge of Arabia as one of the, I think personally, is one of the most successful initiatives which took place in recent history. And just to also elaborate on what role the auction houses played, just to elaborate on what Dana was talking about, there was a piece for a Saudi artist, which is one of the Edge of Arabia stars, hit the $800,000 in the last auction in Dubai. So I think the integration of all the elements, auction houses, galleries, audience, collectors. Now, there is a healthy cycle which happened in Dubai, which is creating an art scene. So an art scene should have all these components and elements for it to become successful. So I believe, on the other hand, where non-commercial institutions, as private sector, to promote art, definitely will flourish and will become more important, because people will understand the success and the exposure they get through being associated with arts, like a Barge Capital. And I'm sure there will be other institutions will definitely be encouraged to follow this trend and you know, join the bandwagon to become more active in that area with a larger audience and bigger exposure. At the end of the day, all initiatives has a purpose. So even if a private sector individual or institution wants to be involved in the arts, they always have to have, whether it's passion or you have something that drives you. So I believe this is definitely coming in the pipeline, and the region will definitely foresee many of these initiatives. But as far as obstacles, I don't think there is any obstacles. But at the end of the day, we live in a very closed culture. So there is a synergy between the decision makers and the public and the people from each country. I mean, in the case of Qatar, we're only 350,000 people. So if he's not your cousin, he's your neighbor. If he's not your neighbor, he's your friend. So at the end of the day, we have a close relationship with the decision makers. Therefore, definitely we can overcome these obstacles.
I would have to say that there are, in our project, we do have few obstacles. It's because our model is based on sponsorship. So asking for money is actually our biggest obstacle. And to go and pitch for someone to sponsor an art project in our part of the world is actually very difficult. While if you go and pitch to fundraise a football team, it might be easier. So I think raising funds for art projects is one of the largest obstacles for Egypt Arabia. The second thing, as he said, that you know most of the people. So it will be some kind of a challenge for you to go and ask someone who's your neighbor, or ask someone who's your friend to fundraise or to sponsor your project, because it's culturally, like, it's not very appropriate within the culture to ask someone who you know for money. And one of our major obstacles as well is most of our artists doesn't take art as their full-time job. So they actually have another full-time job one of them is a major in the army, another one is a full-time practitioner. So for them to take some time off and to produce large-scale works for our exhibitions, and the more they develop, the more complex their artwork become. So we've seen a lot of obstacles in the past where few of the artworks were not delivered to the exhibitions due to the limited time the artist had off from his full-time job. So unless the artist is committed to become a full-time artist, which is mainly not the case in Saudi Arabia, this obstacle will remain. But once the artist gets more kind of a recognition by the government or by the local authorities or by the cultural authorities, they will definitely feel more motivated to just take art as a full-time career.
I think that's a very interesting point, because I think that sitting within the context of Art Basel, it's easy for us to forget that in many parts of the world, the idea of art, an artist being able to be financially solvent or sustainable activity is a relatively new or rare phenomenon. And I think you mentioned this yesterday, Tariq, about the importance of showing that artists can actually make a living as a very kind of basic step in the commercial sector first, and then worrying about the non-profit sector.
Definitely. I mean, and in the case of Dubai, for instance, what sort of impact it created on the art scene on the Middle East. There is a new gallery opening every other month nowadays in Dubai, and many of them come from different backgrounds, nationalities. People come from Iran and open a gallery, from India and open a gallery. So that platform created an art scene, and where the artist is able to showcase his art, and then what means of success measurement parameters is selling. At the end of the day, you go to an artist like Ahmed al-Sudani, who's created a great, phenomenal success in such short years. They have a waiting list, I think, of 70 people waiting to buy his art. So that's a great success story. At the end of the day, the artist, what does he want? He wants to be in a museum, he wants to be in important collections, and make money.
Yeah, it's all about the demand, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, but that also created a huge demand scene, because the more galleries that comes, they will showcase more artists. That means they have to create more audience, and as you started, is about educating the market.
The cultural landscape, I mean, of even like the Gulf or the UAE in particular, is definitely growing, but we're still at very early stages. I mean, that's what I think is very much true. Like, for instance, I'm talking more about kind of the importance that kind of commercial enterprises play in Dubai. If a city like New York lost, for instance, the Armory Show, the annual art fair that happened in New York, I mean, ultimately, it wouldn't be very significant. I mean, no one would really even recognize the absence of it, People would just go on, and New York would stay as vibrant and stay as kind of, culturally important in the world. If a city like Dubai lost Art Dubai, the fair that happens in March every year, I think the cultural landscape would almost collapse. It plays such a significant role in terms of educating people. I mean, the public programs that they institute and kind of, just even almost the frenzy around it is really, really significant. I mean, the frenzy also of the auction houses that happens kind of twice a year. It's kind of, the moment in Dubai, and people kind of gather around. I mean, in New York, when I lived there, I mean, you can do something kind of culturally related almost every day. And you have to kind of pick which openings you're going to on a Thursday night. In Dubai, I find myself attending every single opening and kind of seeing, it's a small community of people. And we're all very much kind of supportive of one another. I mean, in New York, I have a relationship with the Museum of Modern Art and with PS1, with Creative Time. In Dubai, I have a relationship with the people who run Art Dubai and the gallerists who work there and kind of, are working hard to kind of change that scene. So, I mean, I think it's this kind of really delicate group of events that are happening all at the same time, and we're kind of waiting to see what happens in Abu Dhabi and waiting for those museums to kind of open and also kind of start to change the landscape. But I just wanted to kind of reiterate that it's really at the kind of very early stages, and we have yet to see kind of what is to come, I think.
And I think Art Dubai is the only platform that actually highlights the commercial sector from our region, like the galleries from the region, the artists from the region, as opposed to Art Basel or Frieze, where they expose like the local, the more well-known galleries that we see in New York and we see in London and we see in Hong Kong. And while in Dubai, it's more of like the undiscovered galleries, more of the galleries of the Manassa region and the artists of that needs patronizing and needs support as well.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to our panelists, Tariq, Adana, and Abdullah, for joining us today. I want to open up the discussion to the audience for the next 15 minutes or so. I'm sure there's lots of questions. I'm expecting one about the elephant in the room being censorship versus cultural sensitivity. We'll discuss that later.
Hi, I appreciate hearing about how valuable all the commercial platforms are and what the kind of success benchmarks might be in terms of selling works. But how does that impact artists who are working in a more alternative way, with installation, with performance-based work, with interventions? Dana, maybe, I mean, your experience as a board member of Creative Time, supports that in New York, but how within the region might that be impacted through patronage outside of nice things for walls and objects that trade? Thank you.
Well, I mean, Art Dubai specifically is very much kind of supportive of more alternative like installations and performances and that kind of thing. Badoon also is another platform that really kind of is supportive of those kinds of things, and that's, I think, as much as the magazine, as much of part of their mission statement as anything else. And then there are also organizations such as like Ashkal Alwan, for instance. I mean, there are some existing nonprofits throughout the region. I mean, another one that is been around for a really long time is Darat al-Fanoon in Amman, Jordan, run by Suhaj Shuman, who's an artist and also kind of one of definitely the region's great patrons. But as much as it's hard for kind of artists to work in New York in that kind of landscape, I mean, it's probably even more difficult. But I think, it's all related to the fact that it's this kind of growing early scene that, yeah, I mean, I think the thing that Dubai needs most is kind of grassroots organizations and a series of nonprofits that kind of does lend itself to supporting those kinds of, that kind of work and those kinds of.
And I believe also, Dana, we have new platforms being created in the opening show in Mathaf. The show Untold, Retold, that had a lot of installation works in it. So the museums are creating and encouraging that scene. And then you have the Sharjah Bin Ali, which also have a lot of such works. So I believe, you have to understand, we're very young nations. And we have a lot to do and learn in different perspectives. But definitely we're trying to catch up, and we have a lot of taboos, parameters, social, religious. So again, that is. I think we're doing okay for.
Yeah, I think it's the role of the non-commercial sector the role of the non-profit organization. In Jaidah, we've seen in the past the artists are actually developing their artworks from photography and from paintings to large-scale installations, because through the exhibitions that we do, we give them the platform to show the art, to show their creativity. With their commercial galleries, they can actually sell their other work. So I think it's mainly the job or the role of the non-profitable organizations in the region.
Sharjah
has been very important.
Extremely important for being able to kind of support those kinds of artists, absolutely, and they're really kind of dedicated to that kind of program.
I mean, Sharjah gave us, Slavs and Tatars, the opportunity to do something on a scale that we'd never, no institution in the West had actually given us that opportunity. So.
Now someone's going to ask about Sharjah.
Ebadur?
Actually, thank you for the great discussion. I think in a roundabout way, the whole discussion was about nationality, national culture, and platform to stage this national culture in forms of cultural diplomacy. My question is, if nationalistic coding of culture is a fiction, then there are a lot of characters in this fiction. And I guess any of us who know Gulf and UAE, that region, we have to admit one of these characters, very important characters, are the migrant laborers. And my question is, are we, this panel, are the Arab, we're talking about Arab culture, studying of the culture, are you ready to accept this migrant laborers as one of the player in our new Arab culture, number one. Number two, if we're talking about cultural diplomacy, we have to talk about American cultural diplomacy in the 50s and the 60s, very successful programs. Even before the wall came down, they already owned over Eastern Europe, already owned over Russia. And one of the major players in this diplomacy were jazz musicians. They couldn't even ride the bus in their own country. It was long before civil rights movement, but they were sending off to Paris to play music. So my question is, are you ready to make exchanges with, say, Bangladeshi artists, who are working, who created with their sweat, tears, and blood the new Dubai, or curators, are you ready to make exchanges with them, just like that. I am a little sleep deprived, so I couldn't formulate my question, but I think you get the idea.
I definitely am interested in seeing what, and obviously readily accept. I mean, I think you're fortunately none of us represent kind of a national platform of sorts, because I mean that question is probably would be more relevant to kind of someone representing the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi or whatnot. But I mean, I think it's something that has been in the news a lot, and and with respect to kind of the artist boycott in Abu Dhabi, I mean people are trying to make changes in that field, and I have read kind of a lot of recent kind of criticism of that, and I think that Abu Dhabi actually is making an effort to kind of respond to that issue, and that's apparent from I think conversations that are happening with like Walid Raad and Amli Jas, who are very much involved in kind of spearheading that effort. I recently read an email that Akram Zatari, the artist, distributed that I thought was really remarkable, because he had signed both the petition in Abu Dhabi and this petition in Sharjah, kind of post what happened in Sharjah, and supporting the artist boycott in Abu Dhabi until kind of the migrant labor issue was resolved. And he actually chose to withdraw his name from both petitions post what happened, with respect to the Arab Spring, because he felt like it was a really precarious moment in the region, and instead of kind of fighting against one another, he felt there was this need to kind of unite and also allow for these kind of really young countries to kind of evolve without kind of external pressures, rather evolve from within and kind of recognize the need to change rather than having it imposed on them. And I thought it was a very kind of poignant email, and in the email I saw that he kind of asked for it to be distributed widely. I don't know necessarily if it has been, but I'm happy to send it to anyone who wants to read it. And I think, I hope that at some point that will be published, because I thought it was really kind of, I didn't support it all. For instance, the petition in Sharjah. even though I was very close to Jack Perseckin, and I think the work he's done has been very significant, and he's clearly transformed Sharjah into kind of a very relevant, important, and kind of, you know, something that has changed the region entirely. But I think that the work that was included in the Biennale was totally inappropriate and kind of totally culturally insensitive.
An international standard.
In an international standard, exactly. If someone had written what that artist wrote on the wall, I'm not going to say it because it's quite...
yeah, disturbing.
Yeah, it's offensive probably to all of you. I'm pretty sure that anyone in any museum in the world would have taken that down, and the same thing would have happened. So, so I think that, you know, I mean...
I think Sharjah
as a response to...
Yeah.
to
it was a normal
well.
response. I mean, I think what wasn't normal was the way that, I mean, and Payam and I discussed this yesterday, the way in which Jack was dismissed. I think that, you know, everyone agrees really was kind of inappropriate, yeah.
And back to the question of the migrant laborers, I mean, I think what Sharjah offers a kind of a possibility that maybe Abu Dhabi and Dubai don't, or takes kind of has a courageous step in the sense that, in a way, the migrant laborers in Sharjah mix more than they do in their home countries, meaning that, for example, I mean, I spoke Farsi to Turkmens, Baluchis, and Afghans, and those three, all of whom are Iranian nationals, and they would never mix in Iran itself, but they're able to mix in Sharjah. So there's, I mean, I'm not saying that it doesn't say anything about the living conditions and the working conditions, but there's it's obviously quite a complex scenario as well, right?
No, I understand that, but my question was, since a lot of new things are happening, but is there a readiness to expand the definition of Arabness and include these people within the nationalistic culture?
You know, I think we also, as people, you have to understand, we are minorities in our own countries. So we have to be a bit protective and sensitive, where we will totally dilute and lose our identity. You know, in a country like Qatar, 350,000, the latest, I think the total number was 1.8, 1.9 million, and 300 to 350 locals. So that's 3-4 times, you know, the population. So we, you know, I think it is important for us to preserve our identity. So this, I think, creates this gap, you know, for us to totally integrate with the migrants. And then, of course, you have different nationalities and different backgrounds of people who, you know, come and live and work there. It's definitely slowing our growth down because population creates prosperity. You need people, you know, to build cities. But it's a very, very difficult situation, I think. And it definitely has to change down the line if we want to grow and...
Because that's only going to, I mean, your population's numbers are only going to go up, and the ratio is probably likely going to stay the same. I mean, so...
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's take a question in the back.
I would like to point out something very special about patronage in the Arab world. It's the age of the patrons. You see them sitting there, they're all very young. And I'm familiar with the art scene in the world. And I have to say what's great about the Middle East is that the young have taken their responsibility immediately. They didn't only start collecting, but they started supporting the artists from our part of the world. If we look at, I mean, Lina Lazar has made the show in Venice. She's a very young collector and supporter of the art. And Dana has also started very early, all three of you. So that is really special. When we see the art scene in the States, in Germany, the young follow the parents. But here, the young force the parents to support their projects. And that is fantastic because you have this young blood listening, working, bringing out, and engaging instead of buying Ferraris and, I don't know, Rolexes. And that is fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Question in the front. The gentleman in front.
Thank you. I'm just wondering this general area of relation between politics and art, nationality and art, cultural identity and art. For the last 100 years, we have a number of very striking examples of that going very wrong. It's a very dangerous relationship. Is it too romantic to, and I say this as an artist myself, to say we should be working towards a human identity and a human cultural development? Because I must say I'm really very worried as I read the daily newspapers for examples of terrifying misuse of art to be waiting for us in the next decades. Thank you.
I think that's a very good point. I think we've hinted at it today in the sense of the kind of let's say segmentarization, or unfortunately there's a national drive, and we feel it as artists. And I mean, Slavs and Tatars is necessarily a region, and we're forced to constantly have to either present ourselves either as Poles or as Iranians or as Americans. Donna mentioned it earlier. The approach to a pan-Arab identity and how difficult it is. I think it's a reality. It's kind of real politics that we have to deal with. Is that to work with the support of either private or public sector, whether corporate sponsorship or public sector. There's our strategy at least is to literally make sure you're playing the game, but make sure the game is not playing you, in the sense that, you know, present a face that you need to present, but then almost, I don't want to say take the money and run, but then present a kind of an agenda which is a bit more, has a sense of more of a solidarity or more a transnational identity. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, our recent exhibition, the one we did in Venice, when it was a pan-Arab exhibition, few of the artists refused to actually submit their works because they didn't want the exhibition to be promoted as a pan-Arab exhibition rather than just an art exhibition. So I think some of the artists as well, they don't like to be like identified by their nationalities, and they would prefer that for their artworks to speak for themselves rather than their nationality.
I think there is a dilution, and with the globalization and many of the success stories of people who come from Arab backgrounds or Arab parents, but they lived abroad and they became successful, or in the West. So I don't think the nationality is as important as it used to be. I mean, if you look historically, when you look at the case of Islamic art, it didn't have any borders. Absolutely. So what is Islamic art? It could be made in India or in wherever, in Bukhara. And in those days, people didn't know where. I mean, they didn't say this comes from here and here. But today, there's nothing called Islamic art. I mean, you cannot make an Islamic art piece today and say, this is... No, you will say this is a mosaic from Syria or from Damascus. So I believe this changed over the years. And now we live in a time where art is art, and
it's a common language.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that this is kind of loosely related, but there are even just like endless debates when it comes to, if you are doing like a pan-Arab show or an Art of the Middle East show, what title do you use? Art of the Middle East includes kind of Turkey and Iran and Israel, and but then at the same time, if you're going to do a pan-Arab show, that means you're excluding Iran and Turkey, and maybe you want to include them, and then if you say that you want to do kind of an Islamic art show, a contemporary Islamic art show, which is what, for instance, they did at the Museum of Modern Art a couple of years back when they did a contemporary Islamic art show. But then a lot of the artists that they included were Christian. They weren't Muslim at all, and they're kind of from the greater Islamic art world, but they have no relationship to Islam, whatsoever, other than the context was. So this, I think, proves that it's a very kind of delicate and kind of fragile and complicated thing that we're all trying to kind of make sense of.
Take a couple more questions. Gentleman in the front.
Yeah, we're just talking about the fact about Islamic art, as you mentioned. What is... we're just talking about, you mentioned about the Islamic art that really didn't exist in the past, and it may not even have any purpose or any meaning today, but I mean, I just noticed the Museum of Islamic Art. Where does this designation, what is the meaning of that designation then? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah,
So you're saying the one thing, and I'm reading the Museum of Islamic Art.
No, I mean, yes, it is a place where they're collecting old Islam pieces were created in the Islamic world. I mean, you're right, in a way. I mean, I wouldn't argue, but you know, you have to give it a name.
So the museum is more oriented towards the historical art.
It's a museum of antiquities.
Yes.
Yeah.
Antiquities.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's another museum in Qatar that's a museum of modern art.
Okay,
Yeah.
that answers
And it's called the Museum of Modern Arab Art.
resolves the dilemma.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to the panelists again.
Thank you very much.